Okay. Now, we're looking at this paper to see things that we recognize and things that we need to see differently or see new. This day just doesn't want to work with me, does it? All right, there we go. We're looking to see things that we recognize and things that are new. Katie, point out something for us that you noticed and that you recognize from this paper. All right, and where was the thesis statement?
In the first sentence.
In the first sentence, it says, Carl Sagan was perhaps one of the most influential scientific minds that the world has ever experienced. Now, what did you notice about this thesis statement that we've talked about? What does it have that thesis statement should have? What does it do for the paper?
Kind of gives it information on what it's going to be about.
All right, it's information about what the whole paper is going to be about. It's the main idea, right? Also, what's that way that we said all thesis statements need to be written so that we can either prove them or disprove them? They need to have some sort of argument in them. So, while I'm writing, y'all probably need to be what? Writing as well, making notes on your own paper. Here's the thesis. It's the main idea. And it's argumentative. Did anybody notice anything about the placement of the thesis statement? Where did we normally say that thesis statements should appear in a paper? Last sentence of the what? Of the first paragraph. Because that way we're leading up to our main idea and they know by the end of the first paragraph that's where we need to be. If we just set it out there at the beginning, does your reader have any reason to read on?
No.
We're kind of done with it. So a better place for this would be where? The last sentence of this first paragraph. I'm going to write on the side. Move thesis. Good. Glad you picked up on that. That's a good one. Olivia, give me something new that you picked up on. MLA format, or rather not new, but old that you picked up on. Something about MLA format you noticed? Anything in particular? Okay, we got spacing. What kind of spacing? Double space through the entire paper. Notice you don't have any extra spacing from one line to the other, right? It's all consistent. And you said, what was the other thing you noticed? Double space and what? The heading? All right, your name and the page number. This is your heading. That might be something that y'all would write. Heading, just so you remember it when you're writing your own paper. Hey, I need that heading. Good. Kaylee, for your group, what's one thing that y'all pulled out that was something new or something that was a little confusing that you needed more help on maybe? Or needed to look at more?
Well, there was a lot more works cited pages.
Yeah, let's flip to them.
Like a lot.
There's a lot of entries on these works cited pages, right?
Some of them were videos.
Yeah. Have we looked at videos? No, not really. Not for a research paper anyway. But it's good for you to know that those are considered text that you can use for a research paper, right? For example, we got all these different types of sources. Like this one is an article from a what? A magazine, Newsweek. Have y'all heard of Newsweek?
Yeah.
Some of y'all have? Okay. This one is a what? It's a newspaper that you found online. Like maybe you went to the NewYorkTimes.com. Okay. Well, actually that is New York Times. This is a what? It's a video from YouTube. Say again?
Another thing I noticed, like this thing, like telephone interviews.
I didn't hear you.
She's talking about the telephone interview.
Yeah, a telephone interview. We haven't had that, or a personal interview, right? But these are all different types of sources that you could use. Now, for this particular paper, I required you to have a certain type and a certain number of sources, right? We had 3 to 5 sources. At least one had to be a book, and at least one had to be from a database, and your third one could be online or one of the other two, right? And your fourth and fifth followed the same rules as the third one. Does that make sense? All right, so are you going to have a YouTube video?
No.
Probably not. I know a few of you found a video and I said, if it was a really good one and we looked at it together, if it was a really good one, you could consider it a web source. But I don't think anyone in here had a web source.
Would
I
that
mean,
just
not a
be-
web source, a video.
Would that just be like a documentary?
Yeah, sort of like a documentary or something like that. So there are lots of different types of sources on here. Good. We haven't had all of those. We've got how many sources? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 different types of sources. Are you going to have that many? No, you're only going to have what? Up to what? 3 to 5, up to 5. So you won't have as many as this. Why would this paper give you all of those?
So it gives you a bunch of different options.
Yeah, it shows you a bunch of different ways to cite all those different types of sources if that's your source. Good, fantastic. Zach, give me something that you found in the paper that you were familiar with.
The entire thing is comprised of a 12-point Times New Roman font.
Fantastic. This is all in Times New Roman 12-point font, and that's part of what kind of formatting?
MLA.
MLA formatting. We got Times New Roman 12-point font all over the whole thing. Give me something else you noticed that you recognized immediately.
The double line spacing.
Yep.
That was kind of all the same format.
Exactly. It looks the same as everything that we've been writing, right? So this research paper in MLA formatting, even though it has a little bit more to it, it has a lot of the same qualities of papers that we've been writing all year long. Good. Sean, give me something new that you found.
The 1-inch margin from the top and bottom.
Is that new? Maybe it's a new remembrance to you. All right, we got 1-inch margins all the way around. This is still part of what kind of formatting? MLA formatting. A lot of papers you've been writing on paper, so maybe it's not something that you think about all the time, but when we write them in Google Docs, they're already 1 inch all the way around. So that's also part of something of MLA format that we keep for everything. Good. Jackie, give me something that you found that was new to you. Say again. Plagiarism. What idea of plagiarism did you pick up on in here? Where was it? What page? Second page. Into that first paragraph. All right. Not on works cited page, plagiarism. Well, what is it that's not on the works cited page? This sort. What is this thing called right here?
That's like the person.
Say it again. An in-text citation. Very good. What goes in this in-text citation? Usually it's an author and a page number. Usually that's what follows the rules. Y'all flip back over to page 1. Let's talk about these for just a second. We'll get back to the plagiarism. All right, here's our first in-text citation of the paper, right? It points to a specific source in the works cited list. So this tells me which source to go back and look at in my works cited list, right? Why would I need an in-text citation? When do I need to use one?
When you're using evidence and you give like the author and the page number.
All right, if I've used evidence, so that should tell me what in here is evidence. Can you point to the lines that are evidence from somewhere else?
The sentence before.
All right, yeah. All this stuff right here, where he introduces this book, his reading of a popular science fiction book of the time, The Burroughs Tales. The stories were not extremely sound, but still presented ideas of adventure. The idea that life could exist somewhere else in the universe fascinated him and remained with him rather for the rest of his life. That whole idea right there, see where they introduce the source here? From that point to this point comes from somewhere else, right? John Smith himself, the author of this paper, did not come up with that idea. That idea came from who? Eicher. I'm not really sure how to say his name, but that idea came from this person. So he has to give that person credit in an in-text citation. Now, this word right here, what we decide goes in this particular parenthetical citation, should match the first word of what? The works cited entry. That itself is our rule. Not necessarily that we put the author in parentheses and the page number. It's really just the first word of what? Of the entry. So let's go down these really quick. What would be the parenthetical citation for each of these entries? This one would be what? Adler, and one of those page numbers, wherever you got it. This one would be what? Broad. Do we have a page number? No, so it would just be broad. This one would be what? First word. First word. Probably Carl. But we have to put what around this one? Quotation marks, because this one's a what? Is this an author? What is it?
No, it's the name of the video.
It's the title of the what? Of the video. We don't put quotation marks around people, but we do around titles, right? So this one would have quotation marks. Did anybody see this one in the text? This particular citation?
Yeah, all on the second page.
Yeah, there it is, right there. They put the whole title. Sometimes, I mean, you can either put the whole title if it's a long one, or you can shorten it if it's a long title. You can shorten it to the first word or two, okay? All right, let's keep going. What would be this one? Sheba.
Yeah.
This one would be Drake. Eacher, and oh, there's page number 28. Did y'all notice what happened on that first page? What did John Smith forget? Yeah, he forgot his page number, so some really smart editor here went back and put it in. Okay? So make sure that you find those. Now, let's talk about this plagiarism thing that Jackie brought up. Jackie, why do you think this is considered plagiarism right here? Yeah, that source right there, Cohen, is not on our works cited page. Let's look for it. Where would it be? It should be in here, right here in alphabetical order, but we don't have that person, right? So here's our rule. If it's in the text, in citations, it has to be where? On the works cited page. And if it's on the works cited page, it has to what? Be in the text, in an in-text quotation or in-text citation as well. They have to match up, okay? You'll see sometimes I'll go through your paper and I'll put a check mark on your in-text citations, and I'll put a check mark on your works cited page. I'm matching them up, okay, just like you should be. All right, very good to point that out. Jamari, what's something that you noticed on this page that you were familiar with? Did you get anything new that you were familiar with? We've gone over several of them. Indentions. What did you notice about these indentions? All right, that's the margins. 1 inch from the border on all sides, that's margins. All right, when you start a new paragraph, all those paragraphs get indented, right? Did you notice any difference between paragraph 1 and paragraph 2 in the indentions? Yeah. The second one's further indented than the first one. The second one is actually the right one. Indent an additional 1/2 inch when beginning a new paragraph. This one's only 1/4 of an inch. That's pretty small, but again, they're showing you that so you can see that there is a very noticeable difference between the two. Tiffany, tell me something new that you saw in here.
When you have two different authors.
Yeah. When you have two different authors, I think you mean the same author with two different sources?
Yeah.
Yeah, same author, two different sources. This is on page 2.
That's like two different ones. There's a lot of saving.
All right, what author do we have in here twice?
Saving. Morrison.
Morrison is the author. What is the next piece of information that comes in these?
Like, the section.
Not this section. We've got quotations around it, so it's probably a what? It's a title, right? All right, remember, the rule for what goes in parentheses is not that it's author or title or any of those. Those are what follows the rule, right? But the rule itself is what? We just went and looked at all the what?
The works cited.
The entries, the works cited entries. What's the rule then from that entry? What has to go in parentheses? Doesn't matter what the word is, it's just got to be which one?
one?
The first word from the works cited entry has to be what goes in your parentheses. No matter what it is, it's got to be the first word. So what do we do if our first word for more than one entry is the same? We keep going until what? Till we get something
New.
different or new. Let's look at these works cited entries.
But you have to do them in alphabetical order that way.
In your works cited entry you do, yeah. But in your paper you put it in the order that your paragraph calls for. Alright, so here are our two Morrison entries. David Morrison is the same, right? So this would have been our first word of our entry on both of them. Well, I can't have two different sources that say the same, or my reader might get confused about which source I'm using, right?
Yeah.
So I need to go a little further in my entry until the first new word or different word, so my reader knows which source I'm going to use, okay? So I put Morrison Carl in quotation marks because that's my what? Title, good. And Morrison Sagan because that's my title. I'm just going to use the first word to abbreviate it, make it shorter. Plus I need the what in every one if I have one. Plus the page number. Very good. Fantastic. Do any of you actually have two different sources by the same author? Some of you might have. We've run across it before. Maybe? You think you do? I think so. So that's how you would do that. Make sense? All right, good deal. Hannah, tell me something that you found that was new in this paper.
Indention for a quote.
Indention for a quote. All right, let's look at this particular one over here. This is something new that we haven't looked at yet. Now normally, let's look at a normal quote first, or something normal that would come out of a piece of text. Let's look at Carl Sagan for a second. Another work of his similar to Cosmos was his book Pale Blue Dot. In the book, Sagan insults a sense of perspective. Instills a sense of perspective and wonders into man's position in the universe. And they cited that book because that's where that idea came from, right? Now, is this a direct quote? No, it's just a what? What did we use? Yeah, it's paraphrasing, or really it's condensing it down. That's called a what? It's summarizing. He's summarizing what this book is about, right? And then he gives you credit from where it's from. Now, that's not a direct quote. That's a very, very short summary. Now, if we look over here to page 3, we've got something very different in a citation. All right. How many of y'all noticed this section right here? Yeah, it looks weird, right? All right, this is something new. This is called a block quote or a long quote. Y'all write those down. A block quotation or a long quotation. It's called both of them. All right, what makes a direct quote, a block quote, or a long quote? How long does it have to be? Not 4 sentences, but 4 lines. So if you're typing it out and it's direct from your source, and you need to use those specific words from your source. Remember, we didn't have that very often, but you need those particular words. Maybe it's something that, if you're doing Martin Luther King, maybe it's part of his speech that's so important that you get those specific words. But it's a little lengthy, okay? And you type it out and it ends up being more than 4 lines. You're going to format it into what is called a block quote or a long quotation. Now, when you have a quote that is longer than 4 typed lines, you're going to indent it from your paragraph. It's not going to be in line with your paragraph. Do you see how this is indented? All right, you're going to indent it 1 full inch. Now, an indentation for like the first line of a paragraph is only 1/2 inch, so twice that much, okay? 1 full inch. And what do you notice about this direct quote? What do we usually use when we do a direct quote to show that it's a direct quote? Quotation marks. But what do we notice here? There are no quotation marks for long or block quotes. We don't use quotation marks. What's something else that you notice about the punctuation? Yeah. For a long quotation, that period is going to come after the sentence, the last word of the sentence, and not after the citation as it normally would. Okay, so this looks a little bit different, but this is you only use this in format like this if your direct quote is how long? 4 lines or more, not 4 sentences, 4 lines. Okay, all right, good deal. Sydney, find me something that you recognized or that was new. We're getting towards the end. You. All right, this is something small, but we've talked about it before. Removing hyperlinks from your works cited entries. How do we know it's a hyperlink here? Yeah, it's underlined. Now, we do want these little alligator mouth things on there, but we don't want to underline. That means if you hit enter at the end of your line, it's going to create that hyperlink. You just want to go on there and remove the link. You can right click on it and remove the link. Okay? You just don't want it to be a hyperlink because it's a printed paper and not an interactive paper online. Good job. Tatum, tell me something you found.
Older than
Doesn't matter. Just something new that we hadn't been over yet.
the italicized names.
All right, let's talk about this. When we're referring to sources in our papers, how am I going to know what source you're using besides just that in-text citation? The title. You're going to tell me the title of the work that it comes from, right? So if it's a long work, we're going to use what? You just said it. Italics, right? Long works include what kind of works? What's a long work? Long work.
Brain dead as soon as you asked.
I know. It's like your brain just said, off. Something long that you read.
A book.
A book. A novel. Something long, right? More than 10 pages. Probably more than 30 pages, okay? Anything longer than about 30 pages is probably considered a long work, okay? So a book, or this isn't a text, but a whole movie. Like, I don't know, what's a movie that's out? American Sniper. Yeah, we would italicize the words American Sniper because it's a full-length film, right? What about a commercial? Long or short? Short. Titles of commercials would be in quotation marks. Just like titles of articles would be what? In quotation marks because they're short. Now, most of your sources are probably going to be what? Short. You're going to have shorter articles. Now, some of those articles come out of longer books. So you're going to have both titles. So you need to make sure that you format each of them correctly. If it's an article, it goes in quotation marks. If it's a long book, it goes in italics. There's my little song and dance. Okay. So you noticed the italics for the title of the book. Very good. I think most of what he pulls out is books. I don't think he mentions any articles besides these pretty short ones. Okay? And pale blue dot. Alright. Where had we been yet? Nakia, tell us something new that you saw. Alright, what about maybe the writing? Is there anything in the writing itself that you noticed that you felt like was good, or something maybe you felt like that was bad that could have used work? Because this isn't a perfect sample. There's definitely some things wrong with this. What about maybe his conclusion paragraph? A lot of my other students brought up his conclusion paragraph. What does he do in his conclusion?
He told like that was the end. You're not really supposed to say that it's the end of the story. So that's kind of like saying the end.
All right, he doesn't necessarily just come out and say, okay, that's all I have to say, but he definitely makes it well known that this is the end of his paper, right? We want to be a little more suave than that, at least at this point in writing in 11th grade. We do want to answer some specific questions, though. what should we do in our conclusion?
We should restate our thesis.
All right, we need to remind our reader of that thesis. What was that main point that we were trying to argue in the paper itself, right? All these ideas and opinions together constitute a consistent message. Sagan was an example of what a scientist and intellectual should be. Was that kind of his main idea? Yeah, that he was one of the most intellectual scientists of all time, right? So he does get back to that thesis. What else should we do in our conclusion? All right, remind your reader of those, summarize those main ideas of your argument. Maybe go back and look at each particular paragraph and ask yourself, what was my main idea there? Okay, next paragraph, what was my main idea there? Okay, next paragraph, what was my main idea there? And kind of summarize quickly your main points. Now, with that said, do we want to repeat what we've already said? No, we need to restate it in a new way or in a way that gives us a little more insight from those paragraphs, okay? He was a rational, skeptical, and curious individual whose voice is severely underrepresented in all aspects of culture and life today. Did he ever say that in his paragraphs, in the body of his paper? But is this supported by the body of his paper? Yes. So this is a conclusion that he comes to based on the information in his body paragraphs. So it's reminding us of his main idea, but it's also some insight that he has gathered from having read his body paragraphs. That's what we should be doing in a conclusion, okay? His work in promoting scientific literacy has had lasting effects and contributed greatly to the collective human knowledge. He will be remembered as an intellectual and thoughtful scientist and human being. What's that two-word question that I tell you always need to answer in your conclusion? Doesn't matter if you get to the end of a paper and someone who's reading it says, I don't agree. That's okay, right? Mm-hmm. But what if they get to your paper, the end of your paper, and they say, so what? Who cares?
You didn't prove your point clear enough.
You didn't prove your point clear enough. So we always need to answer what two-word question?
Why?
Two-word question.
So what?
So what? Why does this matter? Does he answer so what? Does he answer why he's important? His work in promoting scientific literacy has had lasting effects and contributed greatly to human knowledge. He will be remembered as an intelligent and thoughtful scientist and human being. Did he answer so what?
Yes.
Yeah, he kind of does. Could he have made it a little more flashy and a little more entertaining? Absolutely. Perhaps he could have. But he does answer that question of so what. There is one thing, though. That should be effects. Just so you know. Always an English teacher. All right, there's one more thing that I want to point out that no one quite touched on. Let's look back at page 1. This has to do with your the makeup of what's actually in your paragraphs. Okay. How did we know that this last sentence wasn't his thesis statement? Since we normally know that thesis statements come right here, how did we know that this wasn't his thesis statement?
Because he was already talking about his main point.
And he
Or he was already introducing stuff.
Yeah, he already
Yeah, he used a source here, which means that this information had to come from what?
Somebody else.
Yeah, someone else. So this couldn't have been his own thesis, right? So we know that we need to end each paragraph, or at least that first paragraph, with our own argument and our own thesis. But even if it hadn't been the first paragraph where you end it with a thesis, what about these other paragraphs? What does he end every single paragraph with? With these in-text citations, information from other places. Now, I think this one is the only one that's followed up by a sentence. He ends each one of them with a quote or a citation from a source. Yeah. Let's think back to when we were writing the Crucible paragraphs. Remember when we wrote... Libby's like, please, can we not? Okay, remember back to when we pulled out and we talked about each sentence that needed to go in that paragraph, right? And we talked about pulling evidence from the text in that sentence, well, in the evidence sentence, right? But what if we say you always need to follow your evidence with? And can I just look at a paragraph that has evidence in it and know what you mean just by reading the evidence?
No, you have to go through.
All right, you have to tell me how I need to what?
You just gotta analyze it.
Yeah, you have to analyze that evidence and tell me how I need to understand it as it relates to what?
Your
The whole
argument.
Your main point, your argument, right? So, does he ever go back and analyze this evidence and say how it relates to his thesis that he's the most influential scientific mind? No, he never does. And that's something that this paper is sorely missing that we need in your papers. You need to analyze your information and tell how it is relevant to your particular argument in your paper. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? We'll look at another sample paper that has some more analysis in it so you can see a couple of those. But did y'all notice that that was missing out of this paper? It's probably something you might have looked over, right?
He just kind of gave some facts though, like at the end.
Yeah, he just, basically this paper is a lot of facts. Now it is a lot in his words, which I can give him credit to. He does a very good job of paraphrasing and summarizing his sources, right? But think about it in terms of percentages. How much of this paper was his ideas and how much of this paper was ideas from his sources? Which one was more, his ideas or his sources? His sources. It was much heavier on his sources. Your paper, though it's going to have a lot of source information, needs to clearly be an idea and an argument from you. Your sources should merely what?
Just be there to
Support you, right? So your voice needs to come across more intensely than your sources. Your sources are merely there to support what your argument is and provide evidence for what your argument is. Does that make sense? All right, good deal. We are done with this paper.
Yay.